A very good morning, dear students. Welcome to e-learning classes of Sacred Hearts of the subject economics. Dear students, in the previous lecture, we have completed our 10th chapter of macroeconomics, and the chapter was government budget and the economy. In this chapter, we have discussed about the meaning of government budget. We have discussed about the objectives behind framing of the government budget, and thereafter we have discussed about the different components of budget, in which we have divided it into two parts: budget receipts and budget expenditures. Budget receipts are of two types: revenue receipts, capital receipts, and budget expenditure were also of two types: budget expenditure, that was the revenue expenditure, and the capital expenditure. Thereafter, dear students, we have discussed about the different concepts of government budget, that means planned and non-planned expenditure we have discussed, and thereafter we have discussed about the balanced and unbalanced budget, where the budget receipts and budget where the revenue and expenditures were equals to each other, that was the situation of balanced budget, and where both the elements are not equal, considered was the unbalanced budget. And in the context of unbalanced budget, we have discussed that there were two types of budget: surplus budget, where the expenditures were less and revenues were high, and we have discussed about another budget, that is a deficit budget, in which the expenditures were high in comparison to government earnings. Dear student, today we are going to start our second book, that is the Indian economic development, and out of that we are going to start the chapter number 5, that is poverty. So the very first question is the what is the meaning of poverty? So dear students, poverty can be stated as a situation where a particular person is just unable to fulfill the basic requirements. Now the question arises, what are the basic requirements? So dear students, fooding, clothing, housing, education, and the health facilities are considered as the minimum requirement or the basic needs. And if these basic needs are not fulfilled, then the human being undergoes the pain and suffering, doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't get the proper chances for the growth and development of the life. For example, sickness and disability render him helpless in the walk of life. If a particular person is sick, disabled, throughout the life, he will feel himself or herself the helpless person. Now see further, in a state of chronic poverty. If we talk about the chronic poverty, the particular person lives in poverty, get birth in the poverty, grows in the poverty, and dies in the poverty. That means always remain poor since the birth till the death. Now, if we talk about poverty, then it is not like that the poverty is a challenge for Indian economy only. No, dear students, if we talk about the poverty, then it is one of the major challenge that have been faced by most of the countries of the world. And at present, almost 300 million people, how many? It is a big digit. 300 million people are not able to fulfill their basic needs. And one of the strange fact is this: one fifth of the world's poor reside in India. How much? One fifth of the world poor. That means every fifth poor is an Indian. Now see further, who are the poor? The next topic is who are the poor. So the if we talk about the definition of poor, then it is separate in the context of rural and urban area because of the living expenditures and so on. So if we talk about the poor in the rural area, so mainly these are the landless laborers, the people who are not having land, who are engaged in the various non-agricultural activities or jobs, or cultivator of very small holdings. Either they are landless or they are having a very marginal amount of land. But if we talk about the urban areas, the poor are largely the overflow of the rural people who have migrated to the urban area. So basically in the urban area, the poverty is the cause of the migration the poor people of the rural area used to do to the urban area. Now further, they are usually the laborers who are engaged in the variety of casual job. We are talking in the context of urban area. Now collectively, if we talk about the poor, so these are something people who are living in the kucha houses. These are the houses that are made up of mud, paper, cardboard, or any of the temporary treatment. Starvation and malnutrition, it will be same for the urban area poor as well and the rural area poor as well. Next, no money for education, they don't have the money to survive, so I think education is something a very far cry for them, and suffer from ill from ill health and disabilities, and they usually suffer from the ill health and the disabilities of their body. Now the next topic is categories of poverty. So there are different categories. The very first is the always poor. These are the people who always remain below the poverty line. They always remain poor. They born in poverty, they live in poverty, and they die in the poverty. For example, cobblers and the rag pickers. Rag pickers are the people who used to pick up the waste. Now the second one is the usually poor. These are also the people who are remain below poverty line, but occasionally they just come above the poverty line, but most of time they use to stay below the poverty line. So simply we can say sometimes they come out of the poverty line, but most of time they remain below the poverty line. For example, bricklayer and construction workers. The next one is the chronically poor. See, this category includes the both category that we have discussed. That means always poor and usually poor. They are always below the poverty line, though some are better off than the others, but some are little bit different from the others. Example, rag pickers and the construction workers. Now the next type of poor is the churning poor. These are the people who keep on moving up and down in the poverty line. That means they keep on fluctuating. Small holders and seasonal workers are the example. Who? The small holders and the seasonal worker. For example, a good harvest may bring cheers to the smallholders. That means they will get a sufficient amount of money, so they will be happy. They will above the poverty line. While a bad harvest, that means if there will be bad monsoon or insufficient monsoon, they will ruin them. That means they will not get the proper output, and in that condition they will come below the poverty line. The next one is the occasionally poor. If we talk about the occasionally poor, then dear student, these are the people who are often above the poverty line. They always, most of time they remain above the poverty line, but sometimes due to some of the misfortune they get slip under the poverty line. Just see the very relevant and current example. People running the small restaurants and dhabas, we can say, had to shut down their business during the lockdown in the wake of COVID-19, and the people come under the poverty line. So these are occasionally poor, and as soon as the situation will become all okay, they will again make efforts and will come above the poverty line. Thereafter, the next one, that is the transient poor. If we talk about the transient poor, then it is a category of the churning and the occasionally poor put together. Both the above category that we have discussed are put it under the category of the transient poor. Now the next topic, that is the relative and absolute poverty. These are the different two concepts of the poverty. Initially the relative poverty, so it refers to the poverty across the classes, regions or countries. That means relative in relation to. So when we used to compare two different regions, two different classes, two different countries, so the particular person who is having the less amount of resources will be considered as the relative poor in comparison to the person who is having the higher amount of resources. Now the second one, that is the absolute poverty. If we talk about India, so in India the concept of poverty line is used as a measurement of absolute poverty. Whosoever is touching the line will not considered as poor, but whosoever is below the line, below this poverty line, will be considered as the absolute poor. So this is all about today, dear students. Today we have started our 5th chapter of the IED, that is poverty. In this we have discussed about poverty. We have discussed about the definition and the meaning of poor. We have seen the different categories of the poverty: always poor, usually poor, chronically poor, churning poor, occasionally poor, and transient poor. Thereafter we have discussed another two concept of the poverty, that is the absolute and relative poverty. This is all about today. God bless you all. Lots of love.